There have been so many ups and downs throughout the COVID-19 crisis and this pandemic, especially in the world of high school sports. To talk a little bit more, let's bring in Geoff Kimmerly. He's the communications director for the Michigan High School Athletic Association. Geoff, have you been able to take a breath yet?
Finally, after about a year, actually about 13 months, I would say that we are breathing around here slightly easier. Obviously, we're not completely done with things yet, but the last 2 weeks especially have been comparably very quiet around here when you think of everything else we've discussed going back to last March.
Oh, right. It's been such a roller coaster. And if I can just ask you, when the governor recently was kind of requesting everyone take a pause because of the rise of the COVID-19 cases here in the state of Michigan, what was the discussion there at the MHSAA about procedures that should be taken?
Sure. Well, we were down to our second to last day of winter tournaments. We were at the Breslin Center. We had girls basketball finals actually happening that day as the recommendation was coming out, and boys the next day. So we were down to 16 teams left still playing for all of our winter sports, and we knew that we would finish those up. Obviously, we had limited crowds. We had incredible safety precautions that were being enforced by the Breslin Center staff, and we felt very safe doing those things. We also had spring sports underway, and we said that local schools would make their own decisions on that. Per the Michigan Health Department, Health and Human Services Department, we already were testing all of our spring athletes and all of our winter athletes that were still in participation. So we were looking out for safety that way. And really, when it comes to regular season scheduling, that is always something that's done at the local level. Our next MHSAA tournament events aren't until mid-May. And so it really is a local decision. We have a huge state, and all of these localities are facing differing circumstances. And it's really those people on the ground in those areas who should be making those decisions. And we of course, left that up to them.
So with that, Geoff, if I can ask you for a second too, when you touched on testing, we've talked with numerous people in the sporting world. It's been confusing as to one thing, they mandate something, but to get it implemented as well.
Sure. I think our schools have probably had a better time with this, especially now that we're into the spring, because so many of them were involved with the pilot program that MDHHS conducted with football and volleyball and swimming and diving when those sports were allowed to return at the end of December to finish their postseasons. And then all of our wrestlers tested throughout the winter as well. So the great majority of our schools have had some experience with this testing requirement. The good news is our schools were showing perhaps the most discomfort with the reporting process because they report the results directly to MDHHS. And MDHHS came up with a system that actually made that much more feasible, took a lot of the time commitment out of that. And so that's been good news. Honestly, people really aren't talking about it that much. I think more people are talking about it outside of sports than within sports. I think people have realized that this is part of what we're doing this spring, and schools have figured out how to do it, and we're just getting it done. We're playing, and thousands of teams are playing every week. And that's good news because we didn't play at all last spring.
Geoff Kimmerly with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. He is the communications director for the Michigan High School Athletic Association. And with that being the case, Geoff, now that we're well into the spring sports season, even with the governor's requested pause 2 weeks ago, as you've said, things have been relatively quiet. We haven't heard a lot about any issues with high school sports in particular or getting these protocols in place. So let's start with one. What are the protocols that are currently in place for spring sports, given that a lot of them are outside and many, such as softball and baseball and track, are already relatively distanced?
Well, and that's really kind of, I guess, one of the things that we've all looked forward to is knowing that once we reach spring, all of our sports are outdoors. Anybody that you talk to in the medical field will tell you that the risks go down once you're outdoors, and we already felt like our risks were pretty low because of all the precautions that we were taking. So that's good news. The only contact sports we have during the spring are lacrosse and soccer. We have girls and boys lacrosse and girls soccer. And so they have a few more precautions. They are playing masked, but otherwise, everybody else is, as you said, fairly distanced from one another. We have pages of precautions for every one of our spring sports that we reference on our website, touching on everything from what's due when an infection is found, to masking and what is necessary and when it's necessary, to keeping equipment clean, to spectators. The list goes on and on. It really is a pretty impressive body of work. So we have certainly put a ton of recommendations out there, a ton of other things that are mandated. They're all based on what we've received in part from the National Federation, their Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. Our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee has vetted it as well. And we have said all along, we believe our high school athletes and our middle school athletes are able to participate safely, and especially in the spring, being outside with almost all of our sports non-contact, we really feel strongly about that.
Secondly, teams in spring sports tend to be a lot smaller than they are, other than maybe track and field, than you would see in the fall sports season with a sport like football. So with that being the case, in terms of rules and regulations in place for practices, are they still pretty similar to what they've been in past seasons? Have they been relaxed a little bit? What's the status with that, Geoff?
They really are the same. I think we know by this point what our best practices are, and they haven't really changed going back to the fall. A lot of these precautions are certainly on the conservative side. We want people to do everything extra possible to be as safe as possible. You're right. Most of the teams are smaller, but track teams are still pretty large. We still have about 100,000 high school athletes during our spring sports. And I think everyone realizes that whatever the precautions are, they're worth taking. No one's going to forget anytime soon that we missed a season. And that's been something that's driven us in this office the entire school year. And it's been one of the wonderful things, both at the end of winter, just hearing from so many athletes and families and schools about getting to finish. And now seeing and hearing the same things this spring about just getting a chance to participate again. It really has put things in a much fuller perspective when it comes to athletics as a whole.
Geoff Kimmerly joining us on the Oakland County MegaCast. He is the communications director for the Michigan High School Athletics Association. And Geoff, earlier on, and really throughout this pandemic, we've seen a lot of ups and downs with case numbers, with the situation here in the state of Michigan and in neighboring states, and that's had an impact in the past on the length of these sports seasons, of obviously a lot of start and stop, particularly in the fall and in the winter. How is that translating to the spring? How are those previous stops and those previous issues impacting this spring season? Are we in a shorter season? Is there going to be a different playoff format? What's the status with all of that?
We did start practice a week later. Competition started, I don't believe it was a full week later, but it was a few days later, obviously, because we wanted to give teams time to practice before they competed. But at the same time, we're really planning on being on our regular schedule. We have not changed any of our dates for our postseason competition, including our finals. Those are still scheduled to finish over the first 3 weekends in June. And, that's really something that families have voiced a lot of desire for, and schools obviously echoing those families. People want to be able to play, but they also don't want to be playing deep into the summer. And we don't feel like that's necessary this year. We feel like the few days that we missed early on are more than made up, especially when you consider weather. And that's why this 2-week pause, we certainly have had some schools that have taken the last 2 weeks off. But in the long run, I don't think it's going to be a huge thing. If you really look at northern lower peninsula and the upper peninsula, they don't get to do a ton outdoors until the end of April and the beginning of May anyway. So for the most part, I don't see a whole lot being affected. Spring is used to condensing quite a bit into a short amount of time and moving pretty quickly. And I'm sure this will be just like any other spring that way.
There's a lot of variation, Jeff, with who can and cannot get vaccinated at this point in time. That may change. There's been some proposals from these companies that have produced currently on the market vaccines to lower the minimal age for receiving these vaccines. With that being the case, and as we're looking forward to maybe the fall season, not knowing if or when we're going to be out of the bulk of this pandemic, is the MHSAA currently considering any requirements for vaccinations, or leaving that potentially to local districts to make that decision?
That's not something we've discussed. Obviously, school personnel have been eligible for vaccinations for a little bit longer than people in other professions, and so we anticipate that a lot of school staff have been vaccinated. We know just anecdotally that students are getting vaccinated. I think it's 16 and older now are able to do so with at least one of the vaccines. So we have not proposed anything like that, but we do anticipate, just as listening to the governor and listening to the health department and everybody else, that we're getting to a point where these things are going to start taking effect, and hopefully continuing to bring these numbers down, and hopefully this won't even be something that we'll have to really talk about a lot when we get to the fall. We hope to be in a much better place than we've been over the last year.
This is the last spring season. The spring season is the last sports season for high school athletics of the year. Of course, we're speaking with Communications Director Geoff Kimmerly of the Michigan High School Athletic Association. So looking forward to fall, with this summer being kind of a reset where there's not that overlay from one season to the next, and and whatever delays have happened in 2020 and into 2021 don't necessarily affect the fall. What is the MHSAA doing at this point to plan for whatever situation with COVID in mind might be in place in the fall? Of course, there could be normal operations if we're out of the pandemic by then, but we could still potentially have more setbacks, as we've experienced time and time again, that could lead to some hiccups or some changes. How is the MHSAA consulting with these local districts, of course, planning for the fall sports season?
Well, of course, one of the lessons of this entire pandemic, from not only our point of view, I'm assuming most points of view from different groups, different associations who operate within the public, is the necessity of being flexible and being nimble. We would like to look at the fall and think that everything's going to be back to normal and we'll be able to do the things we've always done. And I think right now, from a planning standpoint, that is what schools are doing in terms of scheduling and things like that. At the same time, although seasons end at the middle of June, off-season training does not, and schools will still have students in and out of their buildings, outside, things like that. So they'll be continuing to put all of these safety precautions into place that we've had all year long, and continuing to work with whatever changes come along the way, whether things hopefully continue to improve. If the health department comes out with different recommendations, if the CDC comes out with different requirements, things like that. So right now we'd love to all say we're looking at doing things as normally as possible, getting back into August. And if something changes between then, we'll adjust to it. We've certainly shown that we can do that, especially over the last 6 months.
Yeah, it's definitely been something that the MHSAA and these local districts have proven to be very proficient at doing, is making these quick adjustments, continuing the season as safely as they possibly can, and allowing these high school athletes to have this vital experience to their development as they go through their high school career. Geoff Kimmerly with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. He is the Communications Director for the Michigan High School Athletics Association. And Jeff, we've seen in a lot of different industries over the course of this pandemic, especially lately, there's been a lot of calls for needing help in staffing. The MHSAA is always looking for new people to join the ranks, particularly on the field as referees, to help facilitate these games. Is that push still continuing, and is the MHSAA having any issue right now getting new people to referee these games, or people that have been refereeing maybe being a little apprehensive due to the continuation of this pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always, of course, recruiting officials. We're always hoping to bring in, new officials, young or old. Obviously, young would be great because we have a chance to have them in our ranks for a number of years to come. But we'll take, we have a lot of people who retire and decide to become officials as well, and they're awesome to have as part of this also. The thing that we work through the most when it comes to officiating is probably retaining officials. We do a pretty good job of getting interested people to give it a try, but it's a matter of keeping those officials past that first year, past those growing pains, the first times having to work with parents yelling at you and coaches, working with you on things and things like that. It's a matter of getting officials through those first couple of years, and then they tend to stick with us for quite a bit. So retaining officials is a big deal for us. Our numbers certainly were affected by some people being cautious because of COVID-19, which is totally understandable. We were able to make it through our tournaments with enough officials to handle all of our games. There were some regular season games here and there that had to be moved and adjusted and postponed. And I'm sure there were probably a few cancellations because certain areas had shortages. But at the same time, when we got to the tournament portions of our season, really the most important games, even at the end of the regular season, we were able to fill all of those games. And so, just like we give just an absolute ton of credit to our athletic directors that are out there in all of these communities making this work and doing an incredible amount of work to provide these opportunities. The same credit needs to go to our officials that who are working many, many, many nights a week. Already in past non-COVID years would be handling tons of games. Now it's probably even more so. And so we just have our appreciation for that group of contributors is always extremely high. And if it's possible for it to be even higher, then we're probably there right now.
Geoff Kimmerly with us on the Oakland County MegaCast, Communications Director for the Michigan High School Athletic Association. Geoff, just another 30 seconds or so with you. Anything else that would be important for our audience to know from the MHSAA, or anything else that you'd like to say today before we let you go?
The one thing that we have wanted to do this school year was to have 3 seasons and have them finish with the normal expected championship conclusion. And the fall, we definitely had to maneuver a little bit, but we got that done. The winter, same sort of thing, especially at the beginning, but we were able to get that done. The spring really should be our smoothest road in terms of reaching a conclusion. And so we're just really thankful, again, to those athletic directors, other school administrators, coaches, officials, families, parents who have been incredibly supportive and understanding the things that we need to do to make this work. People realize, I think at this point, what has gone into giving this a go. And we're almost at the finish line. And then, of course, we start over again. But certainly this has been an unprecedented year, at least in our lifetimes. And we are just really thankful to many, many, many people who obviously are not ever going to receive the credit or be mentioned as part of making this happen, but have had as big a roles in doing so as anyone.
Geoff, we thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.